The great leaders today have great emotional intelligence. So they have a clear understanding of themselves and they have a clear understanding of others, or they try to have a clear understanding of others. So another word for that can be empathy. It can be compassion, for example. So a good emotional intelligence, understanding yourself and understanding others. That's what great leaders have today.
Welcome to the Elev8 podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. This episode, I've got another fantastic guest, Allistair McCaw. He is the author of multiple best-selling books, including Champion-Minded, which we have linked up here for you to check out as well. He consults and advises on leadership, team culture, and mindset. You can see why I like him. As a consultant, author, and keynote speaker, he has extensively traveled the world sharing his insights and experiences with some of the top leaders, performers, teams, and organizations. For over 25 years, he has consulted and worked with, amongst others, Olympic gold medalists, Grand Slam champions, Fortune 500 companies, NCAA colleges, and professional sports teams. Also, I highly recommend checking out his Champion-Minded podcast. Welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Allistair McCaw. As an athlete, you've completed over 29 marathons. Is that correct?
Yes. To be honest with you, I was going to go for 50, but I had a few complications a year or two ago with my heart, so I had to put that on the shelf. But it still is my goal. Cool. But yeah, 29 and counting, hopefully.
That's awesome. What is the greatest lesson that running a marathon teaches you?
Well, I think for me, it's you only know what shape you're in once you get to mile 20. You can feel, and I'm sure anybody that's run a marathon before or done something with regards distance, you can feel great. You can feel great going through halfway, through the half marathon mark. And then you start to maybe pick up the pace or push it. And that's been, some of the biggest mistakes I've made where, the last 5Ks in a marathon is very, very long. The last 3 miles is actually very, very long because, your legs are tired, your body's tired. But I've learned that you've got to have a game plan. It's pretty much like life. You've got to have a game plan to how you're going to run your race. There's got to be checkpoints along the way. You've got to stay hydrated. You've got to stay eating from the beginning. Big mistakes a lot of people make is they eat or drink too late in the race, and it's too late. But definitely have a game plan. And also, if you're feeling good by 20 miles, 21 miles, then you can start pushing a little bit, but not before that. That's what I've learned.
That's that 20-mile mark seems to be the tell.
It is. That's where you know you're going to have either a decent day or not. So, I mean, like I said, and I've seen it at Olympic level, I've seen it at World Championship level where, you can blow up at mile 25, 1 mile to go. A mile is still a long way to go when your body is just giving in.
For sure. You also competed in Duathlons, which is running and biking for those that, might not know, or if you really don't like swimming, that might be your thing.
Pretty much. That describes duathlon. It's for those who can't swim.
And enduring those, was there a mental skill you called upon the most in those long days?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the qualities I had, and this is what gave me inspiration to write my second book, Champion-Minded, was as a kid I learned very quickly that you didn't necessarily need I didn't have the most talent. I wasn't always the first pick for the soccer team or the cricket team. I was brought up in South Africa, so we played a lot of sports there. But I knew that hard work, self-discipline, work ethic, as I mentioned, attitude, being coachable, I knew at a very young age, I'm probably talking 11, 12, that those would be my strengths. Those were things that there's no excuse. You don't need talent for that. And that's something that I was inspired to write with Champion-Minded. That's what Champion-Minded is all about, is using all those things that don't require talent. And, from a young age, I was working on the mindset without really realizing it. I would write down affirmations. I'd always be writing down goals. I'd stick them above my bed. This is when I was, like I said, 11, 12, 13. I even remember having a picture of Rocky Balboa, and I cut a picture of myself out and put my head on his. And those were just some of the things that, I was a kid. I didn't realize it at the time, but already I was working on my mindset, and I was working on visualizing myself being at the World Championships one day, which, I was very, very blessed that I got to compete in 5 of those. So it started at a very young age. I always talk about, you've got to see your vision. It's another word for dream. I like to use vision because it's more conscious.
Sure.
But from a young age, my vision was to be a champion. And that started then. So yeah.
Well, we'll have your book, Champion Minded, linked up to this podcast. From being a competitor, at that level, what kind of inspired kind of the pivot into more the mental training and the mindset work that you do now?
Yeah. My background was obviously in high performance, fitness, sports science, etc. But I'd had a really good career there. And at that same time, I was still working with athletes from a mindset point of view, but I just wasn't known as a mindset coach. I was still known as a performance coach, for example. So it's something that's fascinated me all my life. Having seen and witnessed, obviously, sport at the highest level and been at world championships and been with athletes to US Open and Wimbledon and all these amazing events, it really comes down to the mindset. Really, everybody's skilled. I always say, go and watch the top 100 tennis players practice. And you probably, if you didn't know who, I'm just saying Nadal, Federer, Djokovic were, you probably wouldn't be able to tell who the best player is there, because they're all the same when they're practicing. They're highly skilled. But when the lights go on, when the cameras are rolling, that's what differentiates the mentally tough athletes from the rest. And the margins are so small. How do you deal with those pressure moments? So for me, I'd always be fascinating watching sports and waiting for that moment. We saw in the Super Bowl with the Seahawks and the New England Patriots what happened in that Super Bowl final as well, like pressure moments. What do you decide? How do you respond to that? So I knew that I would go into it eventually. It took me quite a while to lose the fitness performance tag, because I was known as that guy. But I think today I'm now known as, culture, leadership, mindset. And that's something that's a great passion for me.
No doubt. You mentioned some of the world championships and Wimbledon and those things. Being around some of the top athletes, is there a lesson that you learned from an athlete or a coach along the way that kind of sticks out along your journey?
Yeah, I think, no athlete is the same. And one of the key things is that you've got to be adaptable. In fact, I was sitting with Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, last year at Duke. I consulted Duke. And, I asked him, what inspires you to be here for 40 seasons, at Duke? And he said to me, have a look over there. He had his cabinet with all the training programs. And he said, there's 40 seasons there and you won't find one the same. So there's no copy and paste. So for example, we had a great season last season. Let's just do the same this year. He says, because the sport stays the same, but the people change. So what I'm getting to is adapting. One of the key things I've learned is you've got to be able to adapt to the athletes that's in front of you, or the client or the customer. So we can have people listening to this right now that maybe not are in sport, but it's about adapting to that person. And that's something that, obviously Coach K is obviously one of the most successful basketball coaches around, or should I say in sports coaching.
For sure.
And he says the key is adapting. So what have athletes taught me? So much. I've had athletes who have called me out, maybe not being focused enough. I had a Canadian hockey player who, I was, and this is good, this is what we talk about standards, checking my phone. And, she said to me, you're not focused. You're not here. And it was very, okay. And I respected that. I was a little bit shocked about it at first, but I respected that. And I never did that again, for example. So that's one thing I was taught. Tone of voice, how you speak to someone is very important. What else? Um, so many lessons. So many lessons about humility. So many lessons about empathy, understanding why an athlete is like that. So yeah, and that's the beauty. I'm still learning today.
For sure. I think one of the things that sport provides us, you gotta keep learning. And when you talk about adaptability, a good theme for the times that we find ourselves in a little bit when it comes to sports and working with student athletes. With so many student athletes having shifting schedules, cancellations, especially, if they're dealing with school at this level in high school or college, what are maybe one of the tips or one or two tips that you would remind athletes to keep a focus on during these difficult times, that where there is maybe a heightened level of uncertainty, you're not getting as many answers as we're used to? What are some keys that student athletes can continuously focus on to help them keep moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is advice I give actually anybody, not just student athletes, and that's have a game plan to your day. Wake up
Yeah.
with routines and have a schedule for your day. I always say set mini goals, for example. So at the beginning of the pandemic, for example, I put out a podcast or I put out a few messages of I'm setting 3 goals per day, because also my whole schedule has been thrown out as well. I've never been at home so much in my life. 70% of my job is traveling. So I've had to learn. I never did a Zoom meeting before the pandemic. Okay. So now this has become a way of life. So you just said the big word adapting. It's massive, but set mini goals. For example, I set 3 mini goals per day. The first one is exercise, some kind of exercise, which of course is important. And you know what? You might not be sporty. You might not like to go to the gym. Well, I don't like to go to the gym, to be honest, but there's no reason why you can't get out and have a 20-minute walk or do something you enjoy, 20-minute yoga. Good. That means that you've achieved one thing. You've done something for yourself. And we know exercise is so important and increases the endorphins and makes you feel good. The second one is investing in yourself, from reading, researching, learning something today. So I will read some articles, maybe off Twitter, for example, which I love because it's a quick way of going through news, of following interesting people, podcasts like yourself, for example. So, that's where I discovered you. So that's the second one, is read something, research something, okay? Even if it's 20 minutes a game, and nobody can tell me they don't have 20 minutes. Yeah. And the third one is thoughtfulness, which is relationships, is stay in touch with family, stay in touch with friends. I've reconnected with all friends from school during this pandemic that, who knows, maybe I might have never done. It's been really a positive period in that respect, is that I have built up some more relationships, and which I probably would have been, and I put this in air quotes because if you're listening to this, you can't see it, would have been too busy for, which we know is an excuse, but it really has shifted me. So yes, have a game plan to your day, set mini goals, regardless if you're in a pandemic or not. None of us know what the future holds right now. So do all you can today. If you're a student athlete and you know what field you're going to be going into, great. Maybe find out some more things about that field. Take somebody out for coffee, for example, but remember to wear a mask, and ask questions. Just be very curious.
As I saw a good advice, especially for college student athletes, it was like, scour your alumni in your program and start talking to them now.
100%.
It's always one of those things you wish you would have done or wish you would have had time for when things were more normal. But when you're a student athlete, there's a lot of people to tap into, more so than the real world.
You don't really appreciate it that much. If we go back to when we were 19, 20, whatever, and you'd have these people that would come in and talk, and sometimes it'd be, okay, here we go again, another rah-rah speech or another motivational speech or whatever it may be. And, I go into colleges and I go into universities because I consult and I speak to athletes, and I put myself in their shoes. Like, all right, is this going to be another one of those messages, for example? So, I wish as well I had back then an inclination as into ask more questions. Don't be afraid to today it's so easy. Email, Zoom chat, for example. Back then it wasn't. You'd have to phone somebody. I mean, or somehow reach them. Today you can reach people on so many mediums.
Yeah. And all those skills, I think, make you shaped into a better leader. It's one of the big keys that you talk about with student athletes is leadership. If you had to sum up leadership in 3 words, what would they be and why?
Yeah, that's a good question, because leadership, we could give 100 things there. So for me, the first one is the great leaders today have great emotional intelligence. So they have a clear understanding of themselves, and they have a clear understanding of others, or they try to have a clear understanding of others. So another word for that can be empathy. It can be compassion, for example. So a good emotional intelligence, understanding yourself and understanding others. That's what great leaders have today. The second one definitely is courage, because, in my job of visiting cultures and I've seen what's worked, what hasn't worked. Usually cultures where it's toxic, the hard conversations are not being had because the leader might lack the courage to have those tough conversations or be that person, so to say. But we see in the history of sports and so on and so forth, there's been no coach that's been a pushover or an easy person. They've all been very, very tough people. Phil Jackson, Bill Belichick, Greg Popovich, Pat Summitt. These are all tough people. Alex Ferguson, if you're into British football, soccer, for example.
Yep.
These weren't easy people. And that's another thing, I know I'm going off track a little bit here, is with all the successful people I've worked with, I haven't come across one easy one. And why they're not easy is because they drive high standards.
Yeah.
They're people that are expecting the top. Like, for example, that example of the hockey player I told you about who said, hey, you're not focused. You're looking on your phone, whatever. And I was like, okay, that was a lesson that taught me to be focused every time I'm with an athlete, for example. They see it. The third thing I'd say in leadership would be influence. Today autocratic leadership doesn't work with this generation, with, millennial, Z generation, alpha generation, which is coming along now as well. So great leadership is about influence, not authority. Now, there has to be some type of authority, of course, as in you need to know who the leader is, the boss is. And those people I mentioned before, those great coaches, they have authority as well, but they have influence. You can't push influence on somebody. You can maybe push authority on somebody, but you can't push influence. I've got to be inspired by you. I've got to be influenced by you. That is how you make an impact. So I would say those 3 things, emotional intelligence, courage, and influence.
Awesome. Follow my man Allistair. If you're not on Twitter and Instagram, we'll have it linked up here. Like he said, that's kind of where I found him. He puts out some great stuff throughout your career. And one of the things I admire about you is that willingness to learn, the adaptability. You're always getting better. I think there's no finish line sometimes. How do you in your life define success?
It's pretty simple. And that's one of the first questions I ask people when I'm speaking or with a group is, how do you define success? Because it's a very interesting question, as in what appeals to that person. So for me, success is very simple. It's waking up healthy, which I know might sound cliche, but when you lose your health, you know how much you wish you'd have that back. So being successful is waking up healthy, doing what I love to do with who I love to do it with. So for example, through, Jocko Willink talks about discipline is freedom.
Yep.
So I've worked very, very hard up into this stage in my life to be able to dictate what my day is going to be. I work for myself. So I decide what my day is going to be, what I'm going to do, who I'm going to work with. And I've worked myself into a luxury position to be able to choose who I want to work with, who I want my clients to be, where I want to go, etc. So for me right now, and I say this humbly, I'm living a successful life, because everybody thinks that success is out there and will I ever achieve success? Well, if you have a great relationship with your wife, your husband, that's a success. If you're doing well at your job or school, that's a success. It's always something that we think is out there. So, again, it's like happiness.
Yeah.
It's not a destination. You choose to be happy right now or not. I just read the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, while I was in Europe 2 weeks ago. And there you have somebody that's in the Auschwitz and going through obviously the torture camps, and he's choosing his attitude. He's choosing his attitude. And I know that's very extreme, but at the end of the day, you get to choose your attitude.
Yeah. No doubt. You like that book? I've heard that recommended a couple times. I need to dig into it.
Yeah, it's something I want to do. I was in the Czech Republic last year, and it was about an hour over the border to Poland, I think it was. And
okay.
I was hoping to get a day off to actually take the train and go to one of the Auschwitzes. I didn't realize that there was multiple Auschwitzes. It wasn't just one, which are the prisoner of war jails, for example, for anyone that doesn't know. It's a fascinating history. And that had been a book that so many people have asked me, have you read it? Have you read it? And I hadn't. And I thought, okay, I have to read this book now. And I definitely recommend it. It's humbling. It's sobering, what they went through. And I'd also it's on my bucket list is to go visit one of those camps. I know it won't be pleasant, but it's reality. It's history.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of going back in time, not back quite that far, but one of the last questions we like to ask on the podcast here is if you could hop into a time machine and just go back to when you were 16 years old. From your journey, you're competing at an elite level, working with elite athletes and coaches. What one piece of advice would you tell 16-year-old self?
Ooh, that is a long time ago, Tyler. I've got three things. Number one, I was a very, very serious kid. I would say don't take life so seriously. You can still be disciplined. You can still work hard, but you don't have to take life so seriously. So it was very hard to laugh at myself when I was a kid. So that would be one thing. It would also to have more fun, enjoy friendships more. I was very focused on sports. I was very focused on being a champion. And you know what? In a way, there's going to be imbalances. Where there's priorities, there's going to be imbalances. And mine was to be a champion athlete. So didn't build up many friendships or have really a childhood, so to say. But that would be something I'd maybe change, because at the end of the day, life is about relationships. You're probably realizing it as well, as that it's not necessarily what you know as much. That saying is who you know is also very, very important, is building connections. Look, we're connecting now, and who knows who's listening to this that will connect with other people, and so on and so forth. So, life is about relationships.